Sometimes I just feel driven. I mean, seriously, sometimes I cannot sit still. There's a great movie called You Can't Take It With You, and in it, the dance teacher, Boris, comes in. Her family's absolutely delightfully nuts. He comes in, and the father says, "And how are you tonight, Boris?" And he goes, "I am wonderful. I feel like there is a squirrel running around inside a cage inside of me." What is it that runs around inside like a squirrel in a cage? What is it that drives us as human beings? What moves us? Well, we can easily say the original things that drive us, but they've expanded, haven't they? They've expanded beyond food, water, sex, shelter, warmth. And in the lexicon of human drives, there is a whole lot we can talk about that we can understand in terms of how do we balance, how do we find our best well-being. Yeah. You see, how can we think about what drives us today in a way that is explicit and allows us to become more of who we are? If you look in the encyclopedia, in psychology, a drive is an urgent, basic need pressing for satisfaction, usually rooted in some physiological tension, deficiency, or imbalance, and impelling the organism to action. Isn't that beautiful? That's some definite scientific psycho language. When we really get into it, there are four basic drives. These are innate, accordingly. They're acquiring. Think about that. They're acquiring, which is the drive to acquire material goods, power, social status. Then there's the drive of bonding, which is the drive to engage in some positive personal relationships that create feelings of belonging, camaraderie, unity. By the way, this is from a psychological article from the Wall Street Journal, I believe. So what's the third one? Learning. The drive to make sense out of the world. I mean, think about our podcasts. This whole deep end is really about a drive to make sense out of the world, to find meaning, to satisfy our natural curiosity, to solve problems, and to overcome challenges. The drive of learning. And then the final drive, and of course there are articles that talk about the 5 drives, the 10 drives, and it goes on, but these 4 kind of nail it. The fourth one is defending. The drive to respond to a threat to ourselves, physical and or psychological, our status, our organization, our ideas. I see this a lot on Facebook, people defending their perspective. It's really amazing. And here's the thing, when you get acquiring, bonding, learning, and defending all in a balance, and they're all engaged, then the human being is really at peak capacity, the peak performance. This is what well-being is about. And when they're not in balance, well, that's when things get weird. That's where things get skewed and imbalanced, and perhaps maybe neurotic, because there are a bunch of learned needs, right? And I'm not going to go into all those neurotic ones, but the biggie is addiction, whether it's being addicted to Facebook and Reels, or heroin, or alcohol, or sex, or food. These are learned things. They're not necessarily innate. So for me, in my life, I just can't sit still. And there's something in me that just drives me. This podcast, I had to be talking about this stuff. I had to be putting my best guesses into the world in some way. And Bob Hayes and Marianne Rudis have offered me a way to do that, and a great sounding wall, if you will. My drive to rebuild this studio. My gosh, it cost me so much money, and I'm not organized, and I have to learn all this stuff, but I've got to record. Why? I don't know why. Learning, challenging ideas, all of these things are part of it. They're part and parcel of our unique drives to move, to participate, and to be relevant within the human family. So, these drives, it really is about how can we manage our drives, our human drives? How can we grow high capacity human beings in our human family to inspire more awareness and to give all a way to think about themselves, And we're always looking for ways to kind of put ourselves in perspective, if you will. And how do we aspire people to greater indoctrination? I can't read my own writing. And greater individuation and fullness and wellness of self and society. You see, this is what society's trying to do. It's trying to create a field that allows our deepest potentials to come out and really manifest in the name of a larger and more healthy self and a larger and more healthy society. So I've just babbled and laid out my shotgun blast of human drives. So we'll start with Bob. Bob, how do we manage our human drives in a more effective way, if you will?
Well, traditionally we don't manage them very well. They tend to manage us. But part of the quest for deeper self-understanding is to become more aware of those drives and how they motivate us and how they interact with one another. Those four that you mentioned, they're all really related to each other, and they all really boil down to what is our self-concept? How do we relate to our concept of who we are and how we fit into the world? And most of our delusions or our failings occur because we're either afraid to look at our true selves, or we tend to minimize those things about ourselves that we don't like, or we project them onto others. So the essence of moving forward and evolving, I believe, is to learn more about what our true self is and integrate that into our concept of what our self is. Because it's our concept of ourself that drives us. Our true self may be, some believe we're angels on earth. Some believe we're organisms evolving out of the mud. But what really matters is what we think of ourselves, or what is the concept that we carry around with us of what our self is. And that's what motivates us.
And,
my own drive is to expand that concept.
And I mean, part of what this podcast is about is looking at different ways to even look at those processes and things that life cannot do without. They're inherent within life, and we're trying to lift them up and go, WTF, what's with this piece? And how does it work? And I loved what you said about relationship and fitting into the world. I think everything is about relationship in my mind. So, Marianne, what say you on this human drives?
Well, I think the idea that where do these drives come from? Are they innate? And it's almost like there is something inside of each of us that is propelling us forward. And Bob, I loved you talking about the concept of the self. So, I mean, how do we view ourselves? How do we view what we are and why we're here? And but for me, the word that really just sticks to me is that motivation, is finding the we have these four drives that you laid out: acquiring, bonding, all of these things. But what motivates? What's the underlying motivation to acquire? It's for safety. It's for power. It's for whatever it is that we feel that we need in order to be able to survive in this world, but also to thrive and to grow. And I think you're right. It comes all right back to, what do we see ourselves as? Why are we here? We live in a time where everything physical could be wiped out in a minute because of some madman around the world. And we've lived with that for quite a few years now. And so what's our drive to create something in the world that we know could be wiped out, just whoosh. So we have to find something, inside of us, so that the intrinsic drives. And I think that's what I'm working towards, rather than the extrinsic. I mean, of course, I need to make sure I have food, shelter, and all of those things, and those drives are survival. But I think I think shifting to that intrinsic piece, what is it that won't be swept away? And what is it that drives me to put something out into the world that is uniquely from me? So that's kind of where I go with all of this.
Yeah.
And I think we all have something that we have to offer, and finding that and finding the motivation behind it is really critical, especially when you live in that existential reality that it all, nothing, it's illusion, or it all could be swept away. So.
Well, and I think, a point both of you've made is a lot of it has to do with fitting into the world, making sense of yourself. The picture that Da Vinci wrote of the guy with all the arms. That was about proportion. He knew how many finger lengths of each finger to the forearm. He knew how big the forearm was to he was trying to find proportion of the human being in relation to the universe. And I think that these drives give us some keys to looking at ourselves and seeing how we fit. As I reflected this week over the drives and, what drives me, and I think I mentioned last week to you guys, I don't know if it was during the podcast or not, that, Edie's getting ready to retire. Edie's my wife, and she spent the last 40-some years caring for people, and it's her dharma. And go back to our dharma podcast and listen to that. And I was talking to her the other day saying, how long are you going to be able to sit before you're out in the world volunteering on the next board or at Catholic Charities, just going down there, and she said, probably not long, but I'm going to give myself a couple months, I think. And it's understanding what drives us. The learning part. For some people, you look at, if you look at Hinduism and you look at the different sutras, there's a sutra for acquiring. There's a sutra for bonding. There's a whole series of them, of which the Kama Sutra is one. There's a sutra for learning and defending. These are sacred pieces of who we are. We are called by our nature to manage these drives in such a way that it doesn't just benefit me, and I think this is a point both y'all brought out, but it benefits the tribe. It benefits the people that we're a part of. And I think that those are two metrics that need to be kind of monitored as we look at our own personal drives.
Yeah, for me personally, the major drive that I was able to identify, because all of these drives interact with each other and they hide behind each other and they force each other to give or take or whatever. But the one that seemed to drive me the most was the questioning drive. And that's not one of the four that you mentioned, but I think that it's kind of in all of them. And that's kind of why I've always related so well to the two of you, because I think the two of you have that questioning drive about you also. You know, what is going on? What are we doing here? And that just motivated the heck out of me for years and years and years. But I feel like at this time in my life, I've sort of mellowed to that drive, because I feel like I really have all the answers. You know, at this point in my life, I don't think there's much new to learn. Now, there may be new ways to express it and so forth, but I just kind of feel like now I'm just kind of going day by day and just being happy that there is another day in front of me.
That sounds like you're of a certain age, Bob. But yeah, you know, I love that you brought up the whole idea of questioning, and for me, it's always been that question of why. You know, that has driven me, not necessarily what, but just why all of this, and I have come to the place where, yeah, that question no longer holds the motivation that it used to. And it's not because I figured out why, it's because I have figured out that it's irrelevant. The fact is that I don't know. I can come up with a whole host of whys, and I have throughout my life. And but all of them are just speculation. And so, but what is important is what is, and what is it that we are dealing with. And I think that opening up and understanding that every single moment is finding a reason to want to be engaged with our world in every single moment is something that's the drive that I'm looking for, that I'm trying to cultivate. I'm trying to really put into motion every single day, is that the idea that I'm here, and now what do I do with this in this moment? And
yeah. And you know, I think it's important to, this is another way of looking at oneself, of evaluating, where are you in acquiring? I mean, I know people where acquiring is everything. You know, it's about house, it's about status, it's about power, bonding. You know, I know people where it's all about relationship in their small little posse, and how that works. And this is where dogma, I think, forms. I know people who are learning is their whole thing, and they bury themselves in academia and never, and you know, the absent-minded professor is a great model of that. And then the whole concept of defending. I mean, God, my gosh, you go on Facebook, people are defending their point of view, whether it's with little things of affirmations, or atheists putting down cherry picking Bible thumpers as they cherry pick the Bible to put down cherry picking Bible thumpers over and over. But here's what one of the articles said: when one or more drives is unsatisfied, motivation begins to lag, often resulting in unwanted consequences. Knowing this can make the 4-drive model a powerful tool for creating effective, motivated organizations, society, self. You know, and Bob, I can't think of the word balance anymore without thinking of you. But even the 4 drives, it's about balance. It's about, there's nothing wrong with acquiring things. There's nothing wrong with fostering relationships in the name of your own self as well as society. There's nothing wrong with once in a while at least becoming fanatical about learning something. I mean, when I get into a book, I kind of go fanatical a little bit. You know, I start Googling stuff, all that accompanies it. And defending, our next podcast is going to be on atheism, because I'm both pro-atheism and really fed up with some of this new atheism. But I won't go into that now because we're going to go our next podcast. But I think it has to do with defending our ideas, defending our faith, defending, everything, our status, our organization, our ideas. Over and over, we're trying to defend these. And, Bob, I think you said it when we're attacked by an idea that we have is attacked, that is an attack on the self. And that, when we opened up of what the definition of a drive is, it has to do with a need and a negative state of tension rooted in a deficiency or imbalance. In other words, you feel attacked.
Yeah. And to make it even more complicated, we've all got an unconscious portion of ourselves. Now, what percentage of that self is unconscious differs infinitely across people. But we all have that unconscious that's operating. And if you take an extreme mystic point of view, that unconscious is the universe telling us why we're here, telling us what our place is, because it's a message that's coming from the deepest depths of whatever is beyond ourself. And when we have these drives that we're just aware of the surface and we're not aware of or we don't ask ourselves about what are those unconscious portions that are interacting with those surface drives and making some of them seem more important than others, when it might just be the other way around. The thing that we see on the surface that we think is important may be the least important in terms of what our unconscious is trying to communicate to us. So that gets back to the question. The question is, how does my conscious and unconscious relate to each other, and how am I able to learn more from my unconscious?
Well, and
make it more conscious.
And one of the things is those drives you ignore are probably going to show up in some unconscious way. Go ahead, Marianne.
Well, I was going to say, those, we're in a constant discovery of our unconscious, right? It's an ongoing, lifelong thing where we are trying to find those things, and these drives that are within us can control us unconsciously, unless we kind of turn that around and start to do that work of self-examination, do that deep dive, and that we start to harness those drives and use them in service of the world and in service of us, rather than having them, there's a fear factor involved as well, where sometimes that could be an underlying piece that's unconsciously moving us into acquiring excessively or bonding, unhealthily, where you're so afraid to be alone. So these drives that, I think recognizing them, being in dialogue with them, and then having some kind of way for us to be able to harness those for the betterment of the world. Yeah. And that gets back to that motivation piece. What do we want? And who are we?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and a big piece that you both brought up is making them conscious, so that they aren't merely unconscious flitterings, but you actually begin to be aware of your drives and how they're kind of mechanically connected to the world, and how you do manage those. And as you were talking, Marianne, I was thinking of Arjuna and the 4 horses of his chariot. That they all have drive and power, and yet the charioteer, that's us, is there to manage these and have them pull the chariot in a way that is effective for the horses as well as for the charioteer. And I think that's balance. That's right. And the balance is different, because when you're running with 4 horses, which way you turn, the horses on the outside matter. You know what I mean? You've got to learn the relationship of those different drives in order to put them in the right order in your life. And, I think some people who are stuck in the acquiring drive, Trump, Neil deGrasse Tyson once said, when he didn't know about Republicans until he was a teenager, and when he learned about them, he just thought they were the people who wanted to die rich. And how do we temper our own self in a gracious way? Because let's face it, man, when you start turning the knobs of who we are in our within ourselves, those are pretty big. It doesn't take a very large turn of one of those deep knobs in order to vector into a huge change without, and to redefine ourselves in a way where maybe we no longer fit in the situations we're in. And I think that's one of the addiction things. You can't hang with the same people anymore, because if you do, you will die. So maybe those human-made drives can teach us something about our own innate drives as well.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I like what you said about small shifts, because I think that's really important for people to understand that sometimes these small shifts that we make can have a huge impact, and they have an impact over time.
That's right.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to a word you used, Mary Ann, and that was dialogue. And when we're talking about a dialogue with our own unconscious, we risk defining it as a dialogue like I'm talking to another person, like there's language involved. The unconscious speaks a different language. It doesn't use words. It uses symbols. It uses metaphors. That's why the metaphor of Arjuna is so powerful. That's why the symbol of the mother is so powerful. And if we're going to have this dialogue, the more we can learn to understand and use this different form of language, whether it's through meditation or through many of the different things that we've discussed over the many episodes here, the I Ching, different ways that we can have that dialogue, but it's a dialogue of a different order.
Yes, that is so important. Yes, and what popped into my mind when you said that was synchronicity, and I mean that is something that's a dialogue with our unconscious, and to be aware and to be watching for that. But yeah, I totally agree. It's symbols, and interpreting those symbols within our own psyche and our own self.
Right.
Well, and you both put your finger on what's happening in our time, and that's a paradigm shift. We are moving to a new order of understanding, where the pieces are now fitting into a larger context. That, whether it's the environment and climate change, whether it's the unconscious. I mean, think about it. The unconscious only been around 100 years. We didn't know about it. We just thought the gods were talking and messing with us, or coyote, or
They still are.
Yeah, they still are.
They still are. That hasn't changed.
But I think it's important for us to understand, even as we address these 4 drives, and we've reduced them to 4, that the human family is not looking, but has grown, evoked a new context of understanding. It's a larger context. It's the context that allows weather to be within the context of climate, and to understand the way those relationships pan out. It's about seeing the individual and the society And, around the world, here in the West, the individual is everything. In the East, society is everything. There has to be some way of coming together, of us, for people to see that that society has a context, and that is the self. It has to fit within the self. And we can go into myth and the different things that myth does, which is, and we can talk about that at another point, but, whether it's understanding the society, whether it's being fitting, all these are mythic pieces in Campbell's universe. And it's important for us to see that the human family is reaching. It's reaching for an understanding that allows myself to be meaningful within a context that is so much bigger than who I am, and one that is rooted and grounded in reality and in a language of reality. And I think that that's part of our time right now. And having said all that, we're coming to the end of our time. So, Marianne, final comments on human drives?
I think I'm not sure I have much more to say other than I think it's critical that we are aware of these drives and that we look at what our motivation is in living our lives and utilizing these basic drives in the service of something greater than us. And that's what I believe in. So I'll end with that.
Amen. Bob, final comments?
Well, again, it gets back to self-concept. Our self-concept is really a web of drives. And as we evolve our self-concept, that web of drives gets wider and wider and encompasses more and more of the planet and of all of the different people we interact with. And that, I think, is what you're getting at, Marianne, that when our concept of ourself extends beyond our organism and infinitely into other people, then our personal drives become societal drives. And that's, I think, what Red Hawk, you were getting at in terms of the way we're evolving as a society.
Amen. And as a final comment, I just want to say that I go back to, all sense of separation is optical delusion, that self and society are one. You add up, what's going on inside of us and what's going on outside of us are integrally connected, and there's nothing, not a blessed thing we can do to try to isolate ourselves. So where do we go next? Well, one of the things that's kind of bugged me, I'll have to admit, 3 days a week, I'm a hardcore atheist. No God needed. It's like, it's fusion, man. We don't need batteries to run this thing. 3 days a week, I believe in God. And 1 day a week, I believe in all the gods. Now, is this accurate? I don't know. There's stuff running around inside me. I've spent most of my life with my head buried in sacred text, and theology, and philosophy, and spirituality. And we're doing our best guesses here. But I will say this. Next week, we're going to go to atheism. There's a new atheism on the rise, and it's radical. It's merciless, and it's contradictory. There's also an atheism on the rise that is almost like a new religion that is no religion. And it's also gracious. It's scientifically based. It's an amazing thing. It doesn't feel the need to put down those who have a different perspective, but it lifts up a perspective that shows no batteries needed. Atheism, what is it? I'll tell you what. It's not just not believing in God, it's what God you don't believe in anymore. My friends, many blessings, and may the new year shine on you with all the oneness of being.